British people have a global reputation for liking queuing. Last September, that was proven on a global stage as the queue was trending on Twitter, as people stood for hours, if not in some cases days, to see the Queen lying in state. British people like queuing, although actually when you stop and think about it, we don't actually like queuing. It's not that we like the experience of queuing. We like the fairness of a queuing system. If you're not convinced about that, let me prove to you that you don't like the experience of queuing, but instead like the fairness. Imagine someone 3 people in front of you in the queue cuts in. You don't say, yes, I get to queue for longer. Instead, you're outraged because of the moral unfairness of it. It's not that we like queuing, we like the fairness of queuing. All of us in a queue, to greater or lesser extent, I imagine, struggle with patience. I wonder how good you are at waiting patiently in a queue or in a traffic jam. Would you describe yourself as someone who does wait patiently? Sometimes the kind of things we have to wait for are fairly insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Maybe trying to book tickets for a Taylor Swift concert and you're 30,000th in the queue online. Maybe you're stuck listening to tedious hold music because you just want to speak to your bank and the music is going round and round and round. In the grand scheme of things, those kind of waits are annoying, but they're not that big a deal. But often, the kind of waiting we need to do is much harder than that. As of May 2023, which is the last stats that seem to be out, 7.5 million people were waiting for NHS treatment in England. That is more than 1 in 8 people in England were waiting for treatment. Over 3 million people have been waiting more than 18 weeks. Nearly 400,000 people have been waiting over a year. Or think about the wait times in A&E. Or the wait times for cancer follow-up. None of them look good right now. Funding's tight. Doctors are striking. Those numbers are staying high. But each of those numbers is more than a number. It's a person with loved ones. And all of them have to wait. And that waiting is not easy. Many of you will well know that experience. It is not easy. Waiting patiently is not easy, particularly when the wait is over something so big, something with pain, something with uncertainty. This morning, listen to James's call. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. That's the big thing we're going to see this morning. Be patient until the Lord's coming. That's what we're called to be. As we wait, we're called to wait patiently. As soon as James tells us that, he instantly gives us a picture of what it looks like. So he says, consider the farmer. The farmer starts work in planting season. He prepares the ground. He collects together the seed. He carefully lays out the seed. He wants to make sure it's on good soil. And back in those days, there's no heavy machinery to help with this kind of thing. But then after planting season, he's got an awful lot of waiting to do. Not waiting with his kind of feet up and his thumbs twiddling. He's got other stuff to be getting on with. But ultimately, he has to wait. What he has put into the ground, immensely valuable. See, within those tiny seeds are that farmer's livelihood for the next 12 months. Those seeds will become the valuable crop, which will be his food to eat. And the excess he will sell so that he can buy the other things he needs to live. But that moment of harvest, it hasn't come yet. And between now and then, he has to wait and trust that the harvest will come eventually. Which is a challenge, because just because you put a seed into the ground doesn't mean it's guaranteed to grow into a crop that's viable. It needs rain. And unlike in this country, in the Middle East, rain is not a guarantee. Let's be fair, we get winter rain, spring rain, autumn rain, summer rain, and everything in between. We've already had rain today, and now it's bright sunshine. We get rain little and often. We don't always know when the rain's coming, but we do know that it is coming. For the farmer that James is speaking of, rain is not so much of a guarantee. When it comes in big. But it doesn't come often. There are bigger periods of wait that are necessary. It seems to be, from verse 7, that there's kind of two main rainy seasons. An early one in the autumn and a late one in the spring. And before each, the farmer has to wait and trust that the rain is actually going to come. Put yourself in his shoes. It would have been a hard place to be. Knowing that if the rain doesn't come, the crop doesn't grow, the plant fails, and its livelihood falls apart. And for much of the time he waits, he can't even live by sight. It's not as if he can see the crop starting to grow. In those early few weeks, it's all under the ground. It's not as if he can see the rain coming. He can't watch the weather radar, nor the forecast. They don't have those. No idea if the rain's going to come. No idea if it does come, whether it's going to be enough. What does the farmer have to do? Keep doing the bits he can, but ultimately he has to wait patiently for the rain to come and the ground to yield its crop. And James says exactly the same for us. We are waiting. The crop, so to speak, has been sown. See, Jesus came to earth already, and in doing so, he set the trajectory. He came to earth, and he said when he was on earth that the seed has to die before it springs to life. And he was talking about himself. He came, he died, he rose again, and he started the trajectory. But it's not come to fruition fully yet. He's not come back to reap the harvest yet. What did he say when he went up into heaven? He said to those who watched him, I'm coming back. I will one day come back from heaven to take my people back to be with me forever. He didn't take them straight away. It's not that when he went up to heaven, he took his people with him, which is a great relief to us because we weren't his people back then. We weren't alive. Instead, he told his people then, and he tells his people now, to wait. To wait for a future event. To wait until the Lord's coming. Those verses that James read from Titus 2 earlier pick up that idea that the grace of God has appeared, but it is coming back. Jesus, the personification of God's grace, he is coming back. And that day, as we saw last week, will be a day of justice. A day when those who exploit and oppress will finally be called to account. But it'll also be a day of glorious salvation. A day when for God's people there'll be no more suffering. A day when the world will finally be returned to what it should be like. A day when Jesus will perfectly dwell with his people from that point on forevermore. It's a day worth waiting for. And so James says, as we wait for that day, be patient. And verse 8, stand firm. Or literally, strengthen your hearts, James says. With the Spirit's help, build that kind of inner resolve. Speak to your heart. Tell yourself what's coming. Remind yourself of your glorious future, your sin-free future, your suffering-free future, your future where you are perfectly dwelling with your Savior forevermore. The seed has been sown. The land will yield its crop, but not yet. It will only yield it fully on the day of Jesus' coming, when he comes to reap a harvest. So in the meantime, wait patiently. And as you do so, don't grumble against one another, verse 9. It'd be easy to grumble against one another as we wait, wouldn't it? At times, this wait will feel hard, will feel frustrated with the pain and suffering of this world, and it'd be easy to turn that frustration on others around us. I'm sure the farmer, as he waited, was tempted to lose patience, frustrated when that rain seems like it's coming and then passes by. So too with us as we wait for Jesus to come back. As we think, why not yet, Lord? There's a temptation that the pressure of this world will get to us, that will break. That we won't wait patiently, but instead we will lash out. We'll let our frustration get to us, and it will spill out from our tongues against those around us. And James warns against that kind of thing, especially verse 9, in the light of the judge's impending return. Because Jesus is coming back. The judge is standing at the door. And when he finally chooses to open that door, it's as if James is saying, what do you want him to find you doing at that point? Because I imagine you don't want Jesus to return and find you mid-sentence grumbling against another of his people. One of his people who you're going to spend eternity worshipping him alongside. So James says, don't grumble against one another. No, wait patiently until the Lord's coming. The Lord's coming, which is near, verse 8. Verse 9, the judge is standing at the door. Not necessarily near by our time standards. I mean, James wrote that 2,000 years ago, and Jesus hasn't come yet. But he's near in the sense that there's nothing else left to happen. He's standing at the door. He's ready. He's waiting for God the Father to say, go through the door. He's coming back. And it could happen any moment. But the call to wait patiently isn't just a call in the abstract. It's not that James just thinks, oh, I'm just going to randomly tell them to wait patiently. They probably need to know that. No, instead he's speaking to a group of real people facing real challenges. And so the call is to be patient until the Lord's coming in the face of suffering. Look down at verse 10. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering. Not patience in the abstract, patience in the face of suffering. If you've been with us as we work through the book of James, either kind of consistently or kind of dipped in and out, you'll know some of the kind of suffering that these people were facing. Think back to where James started his letter. Let me just read the very beginning. Chapter 1, verse 2. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. These brothers and sisters, these faithful Christians, were called to consider joy the fact that they were facing trials of various kinds. And as we've gone through the book, we've seen some of what those trials are like. There's the kind of trials of the battles within them. The trial of the experience of a divided heart that I'm sure we all know. That continued tiring fight within us where we long to live God's way, but often we don't do it. The exhaustion that comes with continually trying to battle that temptation, to battle our sinful desires. They were facing that. Often they got involved in divisive quarreling, in speaking against one another. They gave in to temptation. They faced the suffering of the temptation within them. They faced the suffering of the challenges within their churches. Whether they were on the wrong end of favoritism, we saw that in chapter 2. Whether they were on the wrong end of an untamed tongue from a fellow believer, we saw that in chapter 3. Whether they were on the wrong end of wisdom from below. Challenges within them, challenges within their church, and pressure from the world outside. Whether that's what we saw last week, as we saw people within the church being oppressed and exploited by rich landowners. Or whether it's being dragged into court under false charges. We saw that back in chapter 2. Or whether it's just the general persecution that they faced from following Jesus. James's hearers were facing suffering of many kinds. Battles within, challenges in their church, pressure from outside. And in that context, James calls them to patiently wait, to persevere until that day of no more suffering. One of the privileges of my job is I have a pretty good insight into many of your lives. Thank you for trusting me to tell me things. As I look in front of me, there are a group of people, and others watching online as well, I know, who are facing suffering. Physical suffering. Suffering with their mental health. suffering with relational anguish in their families, suffering from bereavement or loss, suffering with a deep sense of loneliness, suffering in a really trying work situation. Some suffering for being faithful to Christ, whether that's directly opposition from colleagues or family or friends or whatever it is, or whether it's kind of suffering for following Christ and that you're making costly decisions to follow him. Staying single rather than marrying that non-Christian. Having to live with tight finances because you want to give generously. We all face suffering of various kinds, and as God looks on our suffering, he promises it won't be that way forever. It's coming to an end because the Lord's coming is near. So, wait patiently because a day is coming when those things won't be true of us anymore. When instead, the suffering will be gone for good. Be patient until the Lord's coming in the face of suffering, just like those who came before. Suffering can leave us feeling deeply isolated, can't it? Feeling like no one cares, no one understands. James doesn't want his hearers to feel like that or think like that. He wants them to know that what they face is not unique to them. Instead, a life of suffering is the common experience of God's people throughout the ages. And so he calls his hearers to consider two examples. Firstly, verse 10, the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you look at the lives of God's prophets in the Old Testament, in so many ways, the dominant feature of so many of their lives is suffering. Whether you think of Elijah, who had to flee for his life from Jezebel, who was trying to kill him, or the other prophets around that time whom Jezebel did manage to catch and kill. Or think of Jehoiakim, who ordered the death of Uriah the prophet, or Zechariah the prophet was stoned to death, or Jeremiah, known as the weeping prophet, because of the grief that he faced. Jeremiah was beaten. Jeremiah was put in the stocks. Jeremiah was imprisoned. Throughout history, God's prophets suffered. They suffered for speaking in the name of the Lord, for not shying away from the message that God gave them. And yet they faced that suffering patiently. They persevered. And in doing so, they were blessed. Verse 11. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. See, Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, promised that this is exactly what would happen. He said, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Yet again, James picks up Jesus' words from the Sermon on the Mount, and he applies it to his hearers, and he says, keep going. Keep persevering. You're blessed if you do. Eternal reward is coming. A day is coming. So patiently persevere. That's what James's hearers needed to hear. It's what we need to hear. Patiently persevere. But it wasn't just the prophets who faced suffering. It was Job as well, verse 11. You have heard of Job's perseverance and seen what the Lord finally brought about. Job's story is a famous story, isn't it? Many of you, I guess, will know it. If you don't, here's the kind of contours of the story. Job is a man who is doing well in so many ways. He has a family, he has financial security, his life seems to be going as planned. But unbeknownst to him, Satan approaches God and says, you see Job, that one who faithfully follows you, he basically only follows you because you keep giving him good stuff. If you took the stuff away, he'd curse you. He'd give up on you, God. He's not interested in you. He's just interested in the stuff you give him. God says that's not true at all, and allows Satan to test Job. Satan takes away Job's family, takes away Job's financial security. Job grieves and mourns, but he doesn't curse God. Friend after friend comes to supposedly comfort him, but all they do is tell Job, you must have sinned. If you repent of the horrible sin you must have done, then God will restore you. Job hadn't done anything wrong. He was suffering for following the Lord, and he patiently persevered amidst that suffering. And what did the Lord finally bring about in the life of Job? A deeper sense of knowing who God is, and a restoration of the things that were taken from him. Patiently persevere under suffering, James says. Like the prophets, like Job. But not just like them. We stand 2,000 years down the line from these words, which means we have so many more brothers and sisters to look back on. Faithful believers from every generation who have patiently persevered in the face of suffering. I'm reading my way through a kind of set of volumes on church history at the moment, and it is striking time and time again how people who stand faithfully for Jesus face persecution. We live in a city where there are physical reminders of that in the city centre, of those who died for their faith. Those of you who were here last Sunday afternoon, we heard from Open Doors about those brothers and sisters who are being persecuted right now for following Jesus and are patiently persevering. Those kind of stories are meant to function for us as an example, as an inspiration. Why not this summer, if you've got a bit of spare time, grab a Christian biography and just read of a faithful brother or sister in the past from whom you can gain inspiration, whose example you can look at. I remember a time a good number of years ago where I was really struggling. I was kind of looking ahead and I thought, I have no idea how I'm going to keep going as a Christian. If God gives me the years to get to kind of average age, that is a lot of years of following Jesus. I have no idea how I can do it. And at that time, the Lord in his kindness had me read a book that I just happened to be reading, not really linking the two together. And it spoke of a man called Charles Simeon, a faithful brother from a while ago, and how he patiently persevered under suffering. And God used that Christian biography to inspire me to keep going. So be patient, brothers and sisters, like those who came before. Look to them for examples. There are loads of great biographies out there. Grab one. Or just read through sections of Scripture and see this theme of faithful people being persecuted and yet persevering. And know that if they can do it, you can do it too. Because it's the same God who is at work in them who is also at work in you. And in the midst of whatever suffering you face, know who the Lord is. In the verse 11, the Lord is full of compassion and mercy. In fact, so deep is God's positive feeling towards his people that actually James has to make up a word here. We just have it as full of compassion. Kind of literally, it's pretty hard to work out how to bring it into English. It's kind of deeply, viscerally loving. It's as if kind of James is trying to say within God, as he looks on his suffering people, there is a kind of physical reaction in him. I mean, I know he's not physical, but that's almost the kind of picture James is wanting us to imagine. Not a physical reaction of repulsion or pity that draws away, but of deep love that goes towards mercy, compassion. I don't know if you ever had one of those moments of the kind of physical, visceral emotion that just kind of wells up from within you. You don't really know where it's come from, but all of a sudden it's there. If you've experienced that, I imagine you remember what that feels like. James wants us to know that that kind of feeling is how the Lord views his suffering people. As he looks on you right now, in your suffering, there is a wellspring of emotion from within him, positive emotion, compassion, love, mercy towards you. That is how he feels, in a deep, gut-wrenching kind of way. So wait patiently. Wait patiently in the face of suffering like those who came before, and know what God's like in the midst of that. So how will you wait? There are two ways to wait. There is the way where we break. We're under immense pressure, battles within, suffering from a broken world, persecution for following Christ. There's a temptation to break, to wait impatiently, to grumble against brothers and sisters, and to constantly live with a sense of frustration. That's one way to wait. Or will you wait patiently? Because we know that the Lord's got something better in store for us. The Lord is coming. His coming is near, and he will bring us to a place of no more suffering. He could come any day. Wait patiently. Together, let's wait patiently. Let's endure the suffering together. As I mentioned, suffering, I don't know what floods into your mind. I imagine for most of you, there's something right now, something you're struggling with, something that maybe you have shared with others, or something that only you know. It's completely private. Here's two things to mull on, two questions to mull on in the light of this morning. What would it look like to wait patiently amidst that trial? That's the first question. Whatever suffering you're facing right now, what does it look like to wait patiently amidst that? Second question. Who can I ask to encourage me to put that into practice? Who do I trust? Who can I share that with? Who will encourage me to take those steps of waiting patiently amidst this trial that is upon me? Answering those two questions and putting them into practice would be a great thing to do in the light of what we've seen this morning. Together, we are to wait patiently, to patiently persevere with whatever is thrown our way, following in the footsteps of those who came before, Job, the prophets, brothers and sisters for 2,000 years, waiting for the day when we see those faithful waiters face to face, and more importantly, when we see Jesus face to face. And so until then, brothers and sisters, be patient. The Lord is coming. Let me lead us in prayer. Father in heaven, Jesus is coming. Thank you that that is true. Thank you that suffering will come to an end. Please help us to wait patiently as we wait for his return. Please inspire us with stories of those who came before. Please give us all we need in the face of suffering to wait patiently. Amen.